Today's Scrooge really needs no introduction, so I didn't bother writing one. Born in 1927 on a kitchen table in Wise, Virginia, George Campbell Scott was born into a political family. His mother was related to Judge Campbell Slemp and to Republican Congressman C. Bascom Slemp. George would be raised by his father after his mother died just shortly before his 8th birthday. As a young man, George C. Scott's hero was F. Scott Fitzgerald, and he dreamed of being an author just like him. He would write numerous short stories, but none would ever be published. And while Scott would frequently work on manuscripts throughout his life, he would never be satisfied enough with any of his attempts at novels to try to publish them. Scott graduated from Redford High School in Detroit, where his father had moved for his work as an executive at Buick. George C. Scott would follow up his graduation by enlisting in the United States Marine Corps, where he served from 1945 to 1949. He was assigned to the 8th and I Barracks in Washington, D.C., where he would serve as an honor guard at military funerals. After finishing his service, Scott took advantage of the GI Bill to attend the University of Missouri, where he majored in journalism, but would change career goals after taking part in university theater productions. He graduated from the university in 1953 with a double major in English and theater, and would move to New York City to pursue his acting career. He would win an Obie Award for his role in Children of Darkness, and he would earn rave reviews for his performance as Richard III that ran from 1957 to 1958. 1959 saw Scott's first feature film appearance in The Hanging Tree, in which he played a faith healer who sees Gary Cooper's Dr. Frail as a threat to his business. In the same year, Scott would appear in Anatomy of a Murder, which would earn him an Academy Award nomination. In addition to his film and stage work, the early 60s saw Scott becoming a frequent player on dramatic anthology shows, including Playhouse 90, Play of the Week, and Hallmark Hall of Fame. Scott would finally land a starring role in film with 1963's The List of Adrian Messenger, although his true star turn was 1964's Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. While his performance in the role earned him critical praise and the love of audiences, it's been reported that Scott was unhappy with the film and with director Stanley Kubrick. The two had disagreed on how Scott should play the role, with Kubrick wanting a broad, campy performance, and Scott wanting a more subtle, true-to-life approach. According to legend, Kubrick convinced Scott to ham it up in rehearsals at least, and then proceeded to film the rehearsals without Scott's knowledge and used those takes in the finished film. In 1970, Scott would give another iconic performance, this time in Patton, directed by Franklin J. Schaffner. The role would win George C. Scott an Oscar, but he refused to accept the award, telling the Motion Picture Academy that he did not consider acting to be a competition. However, George C. Scott would not refuse his selection for a New York Film's Critics' Circle Award for the same role. As the 70s continued, Scott would work on television and in film, but would hit a string of flops, starting with 1972's Rage. He would return to Broadway, where his previous hit, Neil Simon's Plaza Suite, had run for 1,097 performances. In 1973, he would win a Tony for his performance as Astroff in Uncle Vanya, and in 1975, he would direct and star in a Tony-nominated revival of Death of a Salesman. He would return to film starring in the thriller classic The Changeling in 1980. Most of his screen work for the remainder of the 80s and into the 90s would be on television and in independent film productions, and he would work prolifically in live theater. A series of heart attacks in the 80s slowed Scott down, and by 1996 he started needing to pull back from productions to care for his health. In 1999, Scott would pass away from a ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm. He is interred in the Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery in a grave that is marked, but that has no name or dates on the headstone.
Merry Christmas, Mr. Scrooge.
Don't beg on this corner, boy.
I'm not begging, sir. I'm Tim Cratchit. I'm waiting for my father.
Tim Cratchit, huh? Well, then you'll have a long wait, won't you?
Thank you, sir.
Born in Manhattan, New York, USA in 1926, dramatist and screenwriter Roger Overholt Hirson began working in television in 1955, writing 3 episodes for the Goodyear Playhouse. The majority of his television credits, in fact, were for anthology drama series between 1955 and 1963, although he would also produce scripts for TV movies like A Bell for Adano and Strike Force. More popular than his television work, however, was his stage work, which included writing the book for the musicals Walking Happy and Pippin, each of which earned him a nomination for a Tony Award. In 1984, CBS would move forward on a prestige production of Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol, starring George C. Scott, who just 2 years earlier had appeared as Fagin in a made-for-TV adaptation of Oliver Twist for the network. Sitting in the director's chair would be British-born Clive Donner, who, in addition to having directed Scott in Oliver Twist, had made his name in the industry by directing 1965's What's New, Pussycat, and had also directed Maxwell Smart and the Nude Bomb, and a movie called Vampira, also released under the title Old Dracula, which we discussed in our Halloween countdown of Draculas. Donner's career shifted primarily to television movies and miniseries, starting with Oliver Twist, and in addition to A Christmas Carol, he would also direct TV adaptations of The Scarlet Pimpernel and Babes in Toyland, the latter starring Richard Mulligan, Eileen Brennan, Drew Barrymore, and Keanu Reeves. A Christmas Carol would be filmed on location in Shrewsbury, Shropshire, reportedly using locals for many of its extras. For the iconic graveyard scene, the production sought and received permission to engrave a tombstone already present in the St. Chad's churchyard with Scrooge's name. According to the Shrewsbury Town Crier, the tombstone had, at the time of production, deteriorated to the point that none of the original engraving was visible. To this day, it is not really known who is actually buried in the grave it marks, but the inscription Ebenezer Scrooge, carved into it for the 1984 production, is still visible, making Shrewsbury the burial place of the protagonist of A Christmas Carol. The debut broadcast of George C. Scott in A Christmas Carol hit a 20.7 rating for a 30 share. That's a lot of inside baseball in just a few words. Let me back up. Ratings, particularly in the days of network dominance, but still today, are measured as a percentage of total number of households owning a television in America. So in 1984, when A Christmas Carol played, a rating of 20.7 means that 20.7% of all privately owned televisions in America were tuned in to the broadcast, and that 30 shares represented not a percentage of the total televisions, but rather a percentage of all televisions that were currently engaged in watching anything. So out of all televisions that were switched on and tuned in to anything at 8 p.m. on the evening of the 17th of December 1984, 30% of those televisions were tuned to CBS to watch George C. Scott play Ebenezer Scrooge. It was the highest rated program for its time slot that night, beating ABC's Call to Glory and Monday Night Football and NBC's TV's Bloopers and Practical Jokes and Little House on the Prairie. It would be the 10th highest rated television program for the week. In the UK, it received a theatrical release. Praise from critics was pretty solidly aimed at Scott's performance, with a few also praising the costuming and sets, but for the most part, critics felt that it was an okay adaptation of the original source material, featuring a phenomenal performance in the lead role. The movie would re-air for years in syndication, and it would receive a brief release on VHS in the UK in 1989. Scott himself owned the rights to the film, and preferred not to release it for the home market, although it was made available to educational institutions, leading to an entire generation of Americans growing up seeing George C. Scott's Scrooge as part of their English class in school. After Scott's passing, the movie would be released to DVD and, in 2010, Blu-ray. Today, the rights for the film are administered by Scott's estate in partnership with 20th Century Fox, who, as you may have heard, was acquired by Disney in 2019.
He's made a point, Bob Cratchit has. Without me, there would be no feast, no goose at all. My head for business has furnished him employment.
Is that all you've learned by observing this family on Christmas Day?
Oh, no, not all, but one must speak up for oneself, for one's life.
There was the year we evicted the entire orphanage. I remember the little tykes all standing in the snowbank with their little frostbitten teddy bears.
Of all the Scrooges we've covered in the list, Scott's is one of the most reluctant and resistant. In fact, I can only think of one Scrooge who was more belligerent toward those trying to help him, and that Scrooge is still coming up in the list. While Michael Caine's Scrooge is ready to learn from the moment Marley and Marley start singing to him about his chains, and the majority of Scrooges are starting to feel ready to make a change by the time they wrap up their encounter with Christmas Present, Scott has to be confronted with the reality of the future he is driving toward before he can understand exactly what people are saying to him. This Scrooge is played low-key and with a twisted sense of humor. He's very assured of his own cleverness and has a smug sense of superiority over everyone around him. He's one of the few Scrooges we see actually chuckling at his own treatment of Cratchit, Fred, and the charitable businessmen who come seeking a donation. And it's not lost on me that this casual coldness, this smug self-assuredness, this outright superiority complex comes from a Scrooge whose production fell directly in the middle of the Reagan 80s. In the era of greed is good, we get a Scrooge whose condescension would not have been out of place sitting on a panel of economic experts alongside William F. Buckley, extolling the virtues of trickle-down theory. This Scrooge makes the decision to eat at home, but the spirits don't catch him in his nightcap and gown. Apparently, Scott bristled at the idea of wearing the traditional Scrooge ensemble, and insisted that there was no way Scrooge would allow himself to be dragged out of his home in such a state, especially in the middle of an English winter. Instead, we watch him go through his past, present, and future in a smoking jacket over his pants, vest, shirt, and slippers, which actually makes him the closest in adaptations to Scrooge's actual wardrobe described in the book. As he is confronted by Marley, Scrooge can hear the desperate spirits through his window, but when he looks, there is nothing there. So I'm actually going to call this a no-show for the spirits, because it's strange that Scrooge is encouraged to look out at the spirits, only to have them disappear the moment he actually does so. The young Scrooge encounters his father after being dragged out of his school by his sister Fan, and the addition of this scene means we don't really get any happy memories for Scrooge's past, as his father is proven to still be cold and distant. This adaptation is one of the few to present a male Scrooge with the current state of Belle, who is happily married and has children. As I already said, Scrooge in this version is resistant, taking Bob's praise for being the founder of the feast at face value, preferring to ignore the Cratchit's hardship in favor of seeing himself as a benevolent job creator who has enabled them to have a home and a Christmas dinner. And suitably, the spirits respond in kind. The three ghosts are very confrontational, with Christmas Present in particular getting up in Scrooge's face, 2 feral children and all. This Scrooge, abandoned by the ghost of Christmas Present, bemoans the unfairness that he, a good businessman and a pillar of the community, would simply be left on his own. And when the ghost of Christmas Future shows up, it takes a lot of work to scare Scrooge into reforming. And he really does have to be scared into it. He has no better angels to appeal to that he cannot twist to justify his own self-interest. It genuinely takes encountering him with the way that he will be treated after his death to put the fear of God, or at least Christmas, into Scrooge's heart. He does not fall into the grave, but the spirit of Christmas yet to come does just about everything else to make his point. And this Scrooge wakes up to rush directly to his nephews for Christmas. Yes, this adaptation is faithful to the end of the original text, with Cratchit finding out about Scrooge's change of heart only after Scrooge pranks him at the counting house the next day. But come on, Cratchit is played by David Warner. Who would ever pass up the opportunity to prank Sark from Tron? For many people, George C. Scott's A Christmas Carol is considered the definitive adaptation of the original work. It pulls a lot of inspiration both from stories around Dickens's authorship of the work and from some of the classic film adaptations that preceded it. And it is definitely elevated by the performance of Scott in the lead role. However, even Leonard Maltin, who is among the critics who sing the praises of this production, could not resist making the comment that George C. Scott is still no Alastair Sim. So tell me, what do you think of George C. Scott's Ebenezer Scrooge in A Christmas Carol? This version of Ebenezer Scrooge definitely has his fans. As I said, it is often considered the definitive production. Are you among those who feel that George C. Scott is the definitive Scrooge? Drop down into the comments and let me know. Let me know what specifically you like about this take on Scrooge. And while you're down there, there's also a like and a subscribe button. If you haven't hit either of those, please take a moment to hit those. Make certain that you ring the bell as well so that you get notifications of new videos. There's also a share button you can click to share this video with your friends, because sharing is caring. If you would like to see more of the film Optimist right away, you can go back to the beginning of the Scrooge Advent Calendar right here. Or there is also my Halloween countdown of Dracula's up here. Until next time, watch like it means something.